Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Keeping Up with Senior Solutions. Today, Jim and I are very happy to be interviewing our own Executive Director, Carol Stamatakis. So we're going to introduce her and we're going to grill her and see what she can tell us about herself and what she does at Senior Solutions and all of the many activities she's involved in. And looking forward to it. So right now, Carol, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. I'm nervous but excited.
You're going to do great. So just to let everybody know, Carol is our Executive Director at Senior Solutions. And before that, she was actually the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. And she has taken part in so many legislative, adult services, adult protective services, long-term care projects in her lifetime. If we have to explain everything, she'll never get to talk. So also let you know that she is a graduate of the Case Western Reserve University School of Law, and she is a licensed attorney in both New Hampshire and Vermont. She does a lot in her own community over in New Hampshire, and she's also a trained hospice volunteer with Brattleboro Hospice. So Carol, welcome to the show.
Yeah, we're really happy that you have decided to join us for this time period. And it might be my educational background, but I was so impressed with all your fields are related and they're based on helping other people. And one of the questions that I like to ask, because I think in our younger years, mine is way back, but the people who influenced me to become an educator were two very important teachers in my life. Who helped you make that decision to make that move that you have made in your career?
Well, I think originally I decided to go to law school and pursue a career in law, and I did spend the first roughly 10 years of my career in private law practice. And at that time, I started doing child protection work. They needed, attorneys to take cases, and then later I was asked to work with the state in terms of, bringing those cases. And then that kind of led to the elder services and some of the other things. But I would say two things stand out to me. One was when I was in college, or I think maybe it was even, let me just think, I think it started, I took a class in high school on just the role of essentially how private citizens can make a difference, as sort of a civics, in their communities. And then later in college, a class on the Supreme Court and basically how the interplay between social and legal changes, where I was exposed to things like the major court cases and how they tied in with historical events around things like the rights of women, the rights of African Americans, and how that all related to changes in society. And one of the things I really came to appreciate and wanted to be a part of was how societal changes led to legal changes, but how changes in the law could then be a vehicle in helping to bring about positive changes in society. So I loved the idea of advocating. And then I had the opportunity particularly when I worked in the developmental disabilities field, to see how families could show up at the legislature or meet with officials and just tell their stories.
Right.
They would have meetings at their, at kitchen tables, and they would just meet with people, meet with whether it be their legislators or other people that had some influence in public policy, and just said, can I tell you my story? Can I tell you what I experienced raising a son with cerebral palsy or, whatever their situation happens to be? And when they were able to do that and make that human connection, it didn't matter what political party anybody was from. It was just that human connection, and they would be able to, to build advocacy. One other thing I'll mention that was extremely influential to me once I had the opportunity to work in the aging field was that I grew up in a Greek American family. And within that culture, it was very common for older adults, even when I was still a child, and I'm sure there's pressures now and that's probably changed. But when I was a child, it was very common for older adults to continue living with the family. It was rare that you would see someone go into a nursing home, and even people with dementia, even people who were incontinent, people who we think of now as, needing to go into a nursing home often, would stay within the family unit, and they would be respected members of the community to the extent they, were able to. So that was very influential to me in just having that foundation of that's normal. They're a part of us. They're a part of who we are. And it tended to be the same way for people with disabilities. So that was really influential. That wasn't really a teacher, but I did absolutely have teachers who were very influential, in
Carol,
high school and college.
Carol, it sounds like you were actually living as a child what our mission is at Senior Solutions.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, and of course, wasn't perfect. I mean, I learned that there was financial exploitation, that would happen within families the way it does now. And now I think we have more in the way of resources, more in the way of even something to call it, even a name to call it. But I think the idea that people would sometimes take advantage of people who were vulnerable was something that happened. And but I would say in general, the inclusion piece is because very often I feel with inclusion, whether it's older adults or people with disabilities or people maybe who have language barriers or other barriers to participation, very often the disability is within our society, more than it is the individual. It's about what are we doing to really listen to that person? What are we doing to include that person? What are we doing to make it possible for that person to enter the building so that they can so that they can vote, so that they can participate in their town meeting, so they can go to the show, so they can, be there and contribute and enjoy.
Sure. I mean, no matter how old or young you are, you want to take part in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think recognizing too just the gifts that people have, people of all ages, all abilities, and we're so enriched when people have the opportunity to share their gifts.
Whether you've come right out and said that specifically, the feeling we get working for you is that feeling, the inclusive feeling.
That's
the fact
true.
that when, I've been working with a woman as a Pearls person, and it's really listening to what they have to say, listening to their stories, and just piggybacking off and being supportive. That's the feeling we get from you, Carol. All right, I haven't even been there a full year.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
So I've enjoyed working for you.
Yeah, it's true, Carol. Your human caring comes through every day. And without it, what we do to reach out to people and what we do to talk about the services that are delivered by our organization wouldn't have half the meaning. I think it's because you do inspire us, because we know how much you care.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think what you were saying, Jim, really speaks to the core values of Senior Solutions, which is really to support people to live their lives on their own terms. And that means listening. And I think what I'm finding is that's something that our agency does something when we provide social services that we refer to as person-centered planning. Right. And that means that when we say in the context of case management or care coordination, that the starting point is what is that person's values? What's really important to that person, not what services do we have that we think are appropriate for them, but what's important to them. So we might find out that it's very important for someone to stay in a particular town, or it's really important for them to live with particular people, even if they might not be people who we would want to live with. And then that even extends when we're supporting people who've been mistreated, right? That people are much more likely to accept services, and people are much more likely to be able to benefit if we start from the standpoint of talking with them about who they are, what their values are, what's important to them, and then take it from there. And we need to, I guess, basically channel them and really try to see the world or see the opportunities from their eyes, through their eyes, and then look at what can we bring to the table to support their vision.
Well, some people end up always have this prejudge of other people, what they look like, what kind of living quarters do they have, etc. And they develop these stereotypes that are totally misleading and wrong. And I think everybody at our organization really respects everybody that they see. And that's unusual. Okay. A question for you, Carol. All right. You came to Senior Solutions in 2015. Is that correct?
Yeah, right at the end of the year. Yeah, right around.
What changes? I know you didn't come in right away and make significant changes, but kind of wanted to know the lay of the land first. What changes did you see that you had to bring to Senior Solutions?
Well, what's kind of funny, in the very first newsletter where I had expressed myself after I was hired, I had the thought that I would like to see a growth in volunteer programs. And I was really inspired by my mother. I didn't think about that when you were asking me about, people who inspired me. But my mother was a volunteer in adult literacy. And she taught many times African Americans who had gone through the school system, but were never actually taught, or never actually provided the opportunity to learn basic literacy, as well as some people that had English, were recent immigrants or people coming into this country. And it was so rewarding for her to do that. There was one woman I remember so vividly, an African American woman who had taken on, like, I don't know how many foster children that she took in and adopted, and through the state. And my mother would just tell me her story, and they became very friendly. And I remember thinking, boy, this is like just keeping her so engaged. I mean, she's helping this woman, she's showing patience. This is a woman herself, an older adult, who wanted to still learn how to read. She was in her later years, but I realized how much that did for my mother to keep her engaged, and to keep her feeling valued and being able to do something meaningful. So I had that thought without really a clear sense of, what might work here. But then we did a really, I felt, powerful strategic planning process. At the time I started, we had a board in place that was very, very interested in doing a strategic plan. And it was really exciting because it was not anything driven by any external cause. They just felt that it was time to to do that. And they had a very inclusive process. We had public meetings in several locations, brought together every imaginable kind of stakeholder into the process. We had members of our board, advisory council, and staff that formed a committee and oversaw the process. And so when we had meetings in the communities, it was in, I believe, 3 different locations. One of the issues that came up in all of those locations when people were talking about, what some of the unmet needs were in our community, or they expressed their opinion on what we should look at, is they said, you've got this wonderful program, Senior Companions, which matches volunteers with people who need visits and help, but it's a very restrictive federally funded program. People who participate have to meet some pretty significant criteria. They have to be willing to give, I think, 15 hours or more a week of their time. They have to be over a certain age. They have to fit certain financial criteria. So what we heard again and again is that is a wonderful program, but boy, you need to expand that. You need to find people of all ages who can volunteer. What about the mom whose kid's in kindergarten half the day and they're looking for something to do, or they would really like to visit their neighbor? You should be including them. And what about the person who can't volunteer for 15 hours, but they have 5 hours to give? And so that really started us down a path of the, programs. And that's probably the one thing that I've really been the proudest of at our agency. And certainly it would not have happened, without Vicki, without, you, Joann, being there to support the growth and development of those programs. But we now have a friendly visitor program that never existed before. The Vet to Vet program, where we match veteran volunteers with isolated, elderly, and disabled veterans. And so we've created roles for volunteers, but it really started with, I think, that idea that, boy, this is a really powerful thing. But it's also a way, I think, that we draw on the strengths of our communities. It's so easy to say we don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have, as much money as the other guy, or we don't have, whatever. But a lot of times, we don't look and see what we have right in front of us that we're not seeing, which is just the talents and the skills and the goodwill of the people that we've been able to really channel that into the volunteer programs. And when COVID hit, they were front line. They were right there.
Well, luckily for us, the volunteers, and especially Vicki and Valerie who lead that, they are very flexible.
Yeah.
And they're so willing to do whatever it takes because they care so much about the people that they spend time with and who they connect with. So I think our biggest question is, how are we going to keep them busy all the time?
Yeah. And we're actually looking at that right now because of COVID. Yeah. We still have restrictions around people visiting with other people. And I actually just spoke with Valerie Stewart, who's an assistant who works with us on the volunteer visiting programs. And actually, Jim, you're going to hear from her if you haven't already.
We've been playing phone tag.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll give you a heads up. So what we're looking at is the volunteers would like to do more. And so she's talking with them about the possibility of making some phone calls to people, who are isolated and, being able to reach more people. And that's something we've been doing all along since COVID hit. But now we're looking at these volunteers who previously visited with people and really are feeling like there's more they can do or more they want to do. They're frustrated that they can't do all the things they could do before, even though they understand, the reasoning obviously, behind all the safety precautions that we still have going on, but they're saying, hey, I can make phone calls. There's always, and there's always something you can do. So I know, Jim, you really early on in the COVID crisis helped a lot of people by making phone calls and checking in on people like our Meals on Wheels recipients, other people we knew about or that we received referrals on who we knew were lonely and isolated. And sometimes too, I think what people don't realize when, you talk about Zoom meetings and different ways that people are connecting, for a lot of older people, the telephone is still a really critically important link to the outside world and an important way to connect to other people. And I've learned recently that there's book clubs, there's all kinds of things out there that people can participate in over the telephone, that are designed for people over the phone to do over the phone. So that's something they're looking at now is expanding or doing more to try to call people, just friendly phone calls. And then we're also hoping that as a part of that, they can talk with them a little more or talk with them about some of the programs and services we offer. Because as you know, very often people don't know about programs and services that can help them. Programs like the Medicare savings programs that can help pay their Medicare premiums, or programs that can help pay the co-pays on prescription drugs or other services. People don't realize that these programs exist. And sometimes if somebody makes a phone call and they break the ice and the person really starts sharing about what their needs are or what would make a difference in their quality of life, that's the that's the way for someone to then be able to introduce a conversation about other things that might help that person.
Carol, you hit it exactly, that conversation.
Yeah.
Because, say I'm living alone. Well, I do, but I'm working. So if I'm living alone and I'm older and, I could use some help on certain things, but I'm not going to pick up the phone and call a state agency. But if I have a friend who calls and we're talking and the friend says, by the way, do you know anybody that could use, such and such? We have a friend who found out and signed up and it's made such a difference. Now my mind will start thinking and I'll say, oh, you know what? I could use fuel assistance or I could use something like that. And that's how we get to put our hand out to help people.
Yeah. And that goes back to, even whether you call it that or not, the idea of this person-centered philosophy is you're connecting with that human being first. You're getting to know that person. You're getting to know their values, their needs. And something like a friendly phone call is very non-threatening. And none of this stuff is ever pushed. It's, as you start to talk to somebody, they may share, it's been really hard because I don't have hot water. That stopped working right. And, I just don't, have the money, or I don't know.
How did you know? I had the plumber in this morning because I had no hot water upstairs in my bedroom.
Well, it actually happened to me, but not having it. So yeah, I mean, that's really funny. But yeah, it's something, and people think, well, I can live with this, or I can live with that, or I'm not going to bother anybody. And sometimes, help is available, readily available. But it takes talking to somebody else who says, yeah, there's that fuel assistance program, or yeah, there's, Senior Solutions has flexible funds, and, sometimes that they can be used to help you get something repaired, an appliance repaired, or even a new appliance, or a wheelchair repaired, or hearing aid, or, all kinds of things that people don't know that help's available.
I think what the volunteers realize when they do make calls, I know I certainly do, is that you have something in common with everybody.
Yeah.
It's just finding what interests and so forth, and let people talk, and then you really can help meet the needs that they're really worried about. And I think our volunteers do that extremely well.
So Carol, can I ask you another question? You can't say no.
Captive audience here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's why we love this show so much.
Oh, I know. You guys are great. You do such a good job. I'm just, well, that would be another thing I would mention, actually, besides volunteers of things I've changed, is just this show. I am just so proud of this. I mean, just what our agency, through you two, first Joann and then, you, Jim, joining in, has allowed us to do. It has really allowed, our agency to just showcase what's out there for people. So that's really exciting to me.
Yep. I hope people are watching and learning and finding out things that they wish they had known before.
Yeah.
But if we can bring it right into the home, it's a plus for sure. So thinking of that, what are some of the other successes that you are most proud of during your tenure with Senior Solutions?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, definitely the volunteer programs, and I had an experience in Brattleboro. It was, I think, the first training of the vet to vet volunteers where I had the opportunity to sit among them. And there was a Vietnam veteran there who had never been active with the American Legion before. And I just left there with goosebumps. I was like so overwhelmed. So definitely, that program, and they were telling their stories. But another area has been the building up of our outreach. And again, you, Joann, have been a critically important part of that. But one of the things I discovered, is there's a lot of resources out there, and I mean, including financial resources in the way of grants. Sometimes they're governmental, very often they're private foundation grants that can be used to improve the quality of life of older adults. And I think often agencies don't know they're out there and funds are left on the table. So we've been really fortunate. And, when we did that strategic plan that I referred to, one of the issues that came out of that as another need was that we get the word out, or that we come up with new ways. And there was a real brainstorming of all kinds of ideas, many of which, Joann, you played a really direct role in making a reality, like this show. I mean, that's, definitely one of them, the columns, the newspaper columns, that you have in many different papers now. They run in many different newspapers in both Windsor and Windham County, and even sometimes we have papers that reach people in New Hampshire, that sometimes some of the same programs, exist there. But we have a very broad reach that way, and we've been able to get some grants that have helped us build an outreach program, and that has supported people who, in particular, help older adults with public benefits. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, Joann, the point you made that most people are not, if they have a need, going to pick up the phone and try to call or try to get help. But if we can be out there in the community and we can meet people where they are, then we're much more likely to be able to establish that rapport and be able to support and encourage that person. So it might be a table at a hospital fair. We've done a lot of that. We had a volunteer who was reaching out to people in a large manufactured housing park where there were a number of low-income older adults, and they were, giving out our brochures. They were talking with people, and then if the person was interested, in learning more about services, they were directed on how to call our helpline, or that person would call for them. So, just being out there where they are, and not expecting that they're going to come to us. And sometimes we'll send out materials to healthcare providers. And we go to a lot of meetings. I know you do a lot of that, Joann, and we have other staff who are part of community health teams, or they're part of groups where healthcare providers and human service providers and other community partners come together and look at community needs. And sometimes just being at the table in those meetings is a way to make a connection. If it's
Sure.
not directly to an older adult in need, it's to somebody in the community, whether it's the pastor at that church or the fire chief or the police chief. And, they hear about our programs and services, and then they pass them on to people. And then the connections you've been making, to Joann with the select boards. So that was all. I mean, a lot of that has really come into fruition in the last few years. And this is work that we've been able to sometimes jumpstart through a grant, or we've been able to get a grant to enhance or improve the ability to do more effective outreach. And then we've looked at ways, well, how do we now incorporate these ideas into our ongoing operations? And so I would say we're able to reach more people. We have more staff now who can actually go into people's homes and help them with applications, but also out into the community to just meet with people. Whether it's, I think about all the fun we had at the strolling of the heifers. I'm, looking forward to that happening again. But, we had a table there where we just interacted with people of all ages. And somebody would say, yeah, I remember somebody saying that, yeah, my mother could really use one of those energy visits. That was back when we had a grant at the time through Efficiency Vermont, and we were providing home energy visits to people, and basically they were like audits.
Remember the light bulb exchange?
Yeah. I mean, and then we would talk to people about services. So it's basically figuring out what's going to work, what's going to get us into that situation where we're meeting somebody and interacting with them, and they start to tell their story. And once they have that space to be able to tell their story and share who they are and talk about what's important to them and what they enjoy, then we can really make that powerful connection.
And I think, Jim, you should say something. Remember, you were doing the surveys to Meals on Wheels people, and you've made phone calls to the town clerks. And
yes,
right.
Yeah, that was amazing. And 4 or 5 of the clerks or treasurers were my ex-students.
Yeah.
So the calls, and they said, Mr. Collins, I remember your voice.
And that is so important, because I think one of the philosophies that I've really embraced is that aging is not, it's a part of life. It's a natural part of the human experience. And when you're able to make those community connections, and you're able to connect with your former student and talk about aging, you're making, really making aging, you're putting that on people's radars and expanding really how they're thinking about, not just aging, but how they're thinking about who's in our community. And what kind of a community do we want to be? And when you're looking, talking with people like town clerks, they're very often, in those leadership roles of caring the most deeply about their communities.
I like it when they said, "You haven't changed at all, Mr. Collins."
So then he keeps calling them back so he could hear it again. No.
Yeah.
Carol, on a serious issue, what are the most pressing problems right now for our senior citizens? Especially here, I think you can talk nationally, but I'm looking at Vermont. All right, what's pressing for our seniors now, other than the COVID?
Yeah, well, I think what the COVID has done has really highlighted an issue that was really that we're coming to recognize more and more, which is the challenge of loneliness and isolation that can impact older adults. And I've known many older adults myself, certainly people who, were friends or family, of my mother, um, who have outlived their children. And we live in a society now where very often, children do not stay in the same community as their parents, and they try to support them remotely, or many people don't have children. Um, and so the question is, how do they connect? Who do they connect with? And I think, when you're looking at rural life, it's a double-edged sword. One of the things that I'm just have been incredibly impressed with, and this only exists in our region to the degree we have it, are the CARES groups in Windham County and the aging in community, or they may go by other names in Windsor County, like Aging in Heartland. But these are really groups that started out as people, meeting around the kitchen table and saying, what can we do to help, people in our community? And what many people don't know, and I learned, is that those CARES groups started with our agency originally, and then broke off and became independent, and some started independently, and we've tended, I think for most of them we've supported them in some way. But those are people at the local level, um, really drawing on that capital, of the smallest communities, and the strongest, very often the strongest CARES groups, the strongest local communities are in the smallest communities, the communities where you would expect that rural isolation to be the most extreme. And yet that's where you see that bubbling up of community spirit, of the sense of, we're in this together, and we're all, we're one in a certain way.
No, it really gives you hope for our society. When you see, like the neighborhood connections in Londonderry, what is it, Putney Cares, all these different groups, they are actually providing, in my opinion, a human chain of support for their communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
they are so phenomenal. I can't say enough about them. And what's interesting, I'm part of this. I'm on this advisory board for an organization called the TriState Learning Collaborative, and you can Google it. And if anybody's interested, you can join for free. And they have all kinds of webinars, and they have actually a program. I can't think of what it's called, but if you go on their website, you'll find it, where they support local groups, local community groups. And they've been very inspired by the CARES groups, and they've wanted, sometimes representatives from the CARES groups have given webinars, or they've participated in webinars, because even in New Hampshire and Maine, which are the other states that are a part of the tri-state, they don't have anything quite like our CARES groups. There might be a few, but not the concentration. And they really want to learn from the groups. And even when I've been in national audiences, people are very, very interested. They want to learn more about how they can replicate those programs. And I think it goes back to one of our core values. I have a cheat sheet here. This is our brochure I'm looking at, and on the back of it, and this is on our website, you can see our mission, vision, and values. And one of our values is we're committed to maintaining strong community partnerships to assure our clients' varied needs are met, and to collectively strengthen the infrastructure of support for older adults. So that means that we're not so arrogant as to think that even though we are the oldest and most established and, most comprehensive agency in our region serving older adults, we absolutely do not do that alone. And the more we collaborate with local communities, the more we strengthen that safety net of support. And really during the pandemic, when it first hit, I'm thinking of how we worked there were mutual aid societies that suddenly became reinvigorated. Some always existed, other new ones popped up, and how we were right there, not saying we're the ones that are going to do everything, we're the ones that are going to rush in and solve all the problems, but we're going to honor and respect and look at the strength of our communities and look at what can we do to fill the gaps? What can we do to build on the strengths that are already there? And that's something we've done that's made our visiting program so successful is Vicki Mastroianni, our home visitor coordinator, doesn't, if someone's interested in a visiting program and there's already a local community organization that wants to do that, she doesn't go in and say, okay, we're going to step in here and take this over. It's, we can train your volunteers, we can help you develop your own visitor program, or hey, you've already got one, we can help we do criminal background checks for a lot of other programs other than our own, and that's a way that we can help. We can help support programs, not by saying we'll go in and do it all or we'll do it better, but we will do that by recognizing everything that already exists. We have hospitals in our region doing a lot of really good disease prevention programs. And we have our own evidence-based wellness programs, but we really look at how do we get the word out about what the hospital's doing, what SASH is doing. They're a really valued partner. We're a part of these SASH teams that are multidisciplinary teams that are very often focused on health and wellness. And so it's not really how do we meet all these needs, but how do we strengthen the communities? How are we partners? So the partnership is a huge, huge part of who we are and what we do. How do we build strong partnerships? It's not about us. It's about our communities. It's about our region. It's how do we build infrastructures of support with our partners and help them and support them and help them be successful.
I think that's very important. You're right. Very right. And, I'm just looking at things we wanted to ask you. Jim, is there anything you'd like to ask before we ask our final question?
Well, I've been so impressed that I haven't been, it'll be a full year, I believe, in February that I've been there. I've been impressed too with our helpline and the people who manage the helpline.
Oh, what's our helpline number?
Get that number out.
I'm so embarrassed I don't have it memorized, but it's
802.
No, Joann has it.
I got it down, Pat. 802-885-2669. And one of our very own helpline operators, not far from where Carol's sitting now, will be picking up the phone and helping you answer questions.
Yeah, I mean, a question would be, I ran out of fuel oil. I don't have any heat. What can I do?
Yeah, and even not only for themselves, but a lot of times people may not realize that you don't have to be an older adult to call our helpline.
Right.
So I can call and say, I am really concerned about my neighbor, and we don't probably have time now to get into the whole issue of self-neglect, but, very often people call, and we do help people who when there's a concern about self-neglect, or when there's a concern that somebody may have an issue where they may be losing their ability to care for themselves the way they did before. And so a lot of times people are concerned about someone and they don't really know, is there anything I can do? Is there some place I can refer them? Are you able to help them? And people are confused too a lot of times because they don't realize that services like our helpline are available to anyone of any age, any income level, as long as they're trying to help or support an older adult. So there's not an income test to use the helpline. There's not an income test for really for any program that's through the Older Americans Act. That's one of our major funding sources. So definitely promoting the helpline as, if they don't have the service, or if it's not a service we provide, they will do their best to direct whoever's calling to a program or service that can help them.
Yeah.
So
And
that's a really important piece
really
of it.
important. And I think another part of our business is the way we support, especially the time is over, but open enrollment for people who are really, unsure if they have the right Medicare, Medicaid services. And through open enrollment time period, we have experts who will help those people with concerns. And ultimately, it ends up saving those people a lot of money.
Yeah, and what's really important about that is our program, our SHIP program, which is State Health Insurance Assistance Program, I believe,
Right.
is the, so it's not strictly SH, I mean, it goes by SHIP, but it's, that program is completely independent of any commercial interest. And one of the challenges that really came to the forefront this year, worse than in the past, even though it's been a growing problem, is people are bombarded by so much information by commercial interests. And a lot of times, not all of those interests are ethical, and people don't know who they can believe or who they can trust. And it's really important to know that our SHIP program, which is accessed through our helpline, same number, is an independent source of information about Medicare and about other health insurance options for older adults. And we do not get any funding from any commercial interests whose goal is to be financially enriched by somebody going to them. So our advice is completely independent. And I really encourage anybody who's going to be turning 65 or, anyone going on Medicare to
Carol,
check out our boot camps.
we have boot camps coming up on January 14th, February 18th, March 11th, and April 18th. If people call the helpline and pick one of those, we call them boot camp sessions, if they want to register for one of those, they have to, do that over through the helpline and give the helpline their email address, because these are virtual. So then we can send them the link to whichever one of those they want to sign up for. And that'll help them, or anybody who's helping them, figure out what they need to do for Medicare. They'll get the best information. They can ask questions. It's so thorough. I would say that both our two Medicare specialists, Patty and Sarah, if they don't know anything about it that you're asking, nobody does. Right. And they're very fair and they're creative. I mean, they know the ins and outs of how things work. So I would encourage them, thank you for bringing that up, that Medicare boot camps are great. And then you'll be all prepared for open enrollment October 15th to December 7th this coming year. So Carol, one more thing.
Unknown caller.
Uh-oh.
It's not me. It's not me calling you.
It's not
me. Hi, Carol. We're kind of near the end, and I'll let Jim jump in too. But what do you have planned for the future?
Well, I guess for me, I feel like I've learned a lot in the work I've done earlier in my career, before I did work with people with developmental disabilities, I was legal counsel for the agency in New Hampshire that served older adults. And then I worked in the developmental disabilities field, where I learned a great deal. And I think, aging programs or people concerned with older adults have a lot they could learn from people with disabilities and their families. And then I, working here for the last a little over 5 years, I've learned a lot about just some of the challenges and barriers, but also just how much is available. So I'm really looking at how I can use the knowledge I have, in maybe a more targeted way. So I'm hoping to just keep the, time and space, be able to support initiatives, that may come along that provide an opportunity to move forward in some way. So I'm, hoping to be open to doing maybe some consulting work, but also some volunteer work in the aging field, to be able to look at how can I use what I've learned to be able to, help people, individuals, help organizations. I'm, looking at maybe getting, in terms of, you'd mentioned earlier on that I'm licensed to practice law in New Hampshire and Vermont. So I'm looking at, how can I use that to also help people individually?
Right.
Because right now, the role I've been in at Senior Solutions, I haven't had much of an opportunity to really do one-on-one helping people individually. And that was one of the reasons too that I had become a volunteer for Brattleboro Hospice, which was something that was very rewarding to me. And so I'd love to put in a pitch for them as well. They're just a phenomenal local organization, and it was has been a privilege for me. I'm not helping anyone right now through that organization, and they've also suffered like everyone has through COVID. But there's something really powerful, and I know, Jim, you're doing, working in the Pearls program, and I've even thought maybe I'd love to do that, do a little of that. And that's a one-on-one limited duration, kind of almost like a goal setting. I don't want to call it counseling, but it's a, goal setting program. So I'm trying to just, stay open to possibilities. And I am on the State Commission on Aging in New Hampshire, where I live. And that's a new entity. Basically, it's they have a staff member, and I was appointed to that. So it's really in its infancy. So I'm hoping to be able to spend more time helping that entity develop, grow and develop in New Hampshire. But I also want very much to stay involved in Vermont. So I'm hoping to just be able to build on a lot of the connections I've made and really look at where will the knowledge that I have do the most good.
Are there lobby groups that in Vermont and New Hampshire that specialize in senior issues?
Yeah, so actually, thank you for asking that. One that I would definitely make a big pitch for is Cove, which is community of, Community of Vermont Elders.
Community of Vermont Elders, right?
Okay, that didn't sound right when I was saying it, but anyway, it's Cove, COVE, and just if you're Googling them, type in Cove Vermont Elders, and I know they just did a training, a program on people interested in learning how to have an impact with the legislature. So they offer opportunities for people to volunteer in different ways. I'm on their board, and that's something that I'm hoping to be able to continue to do when I leave Senior Solutions, is continue to serve on the Cove board. And so they're a great organization, and they do a lot. Also, I know this time didn't allow me to talk a lot about one of my passions is elder abuse, but one of the things I definitely want to do when I leave Senior Solutions is volunteer through pro bono programs to help older victims of domestic violence. And I know there's a program in New Hampshire and also in Vermont. So that's one of the things that is definitely on the top of my list. So whatever else I might do, one of the things I learned through Senior Solutions is that they fall through the cracks very often, older people who are victims of whether it's domestic violence or other kinds of elder abuse. So I would definitely like to be able and will, plan to offer myself as a volunteer, in New Hampshire and Vermont to whatever extent those opportunities exist to be able to, help people in that situation.
Carol, we have no doubt wherever you go, all the different places you're going to go, all the different things you're going to do, you will definitely be helping people. And you're going to be spreading help wherever you go. I just hope that you will leave us with your helpline number so we can get a hold of you.
Definitely. And I think, the one thing that I think is so important is when we think about aging is that it's not, it's not something for older people. It's really for everyone. It's thinking in terms of what kind of a community do I want to be in as I'm aging? What kind of a community do I want the people I love and care about who are aging to be a part of? And so it goes beyond aging. And it's really about how do we welcome people? How do we welcome not only the stranger, the person who's a stranger to us, but how do we welcome the people who are already here? And so that they continue to be welcomed as they go through, the stages of life that are totally natural and are a part of life, and how do we recognize the parts of aging that are positive and all the gifts that people have to give, but at the same time, not turn a blind eye to the fact that, there are challenges that many people will face, and what can we do to support people? And part of that is acknowledging aging and not denying it and seeing it as a natural part of life, just like disability is a natural part of life, just like illness and aging is a part of life. And the more we do to embrace that and to accept that, the more fully human we are, and the more we people of all ages are fully embracing the human experience.
Very well said.
Yeah, and Carol, I don't know about everybody else, but after spending this hour with you, I feel like a better person. Thank you. You're
too kind. Too kind.
She's going to ask you for a raise tomorrow, okay?
Don't worry.
Oh, you're both wonderful.
No, we've had a lot of fun, but we've learned a lot as well. And we appreciate you taking the time, because I know your schedule is busy, to spend with this program for an hour. Thank you.
Hopefully never too busy to talk about these issues. They're so important.
I know they are.
Well, I'm sure that the audience appreciates it too. So thank you so much, Carol. See ya.
Thank you, Carol. We'll see you.